welcome to the third and final video in the auto to manual transmission swap for our 1.8 Mark IV. So today, or this process is kind of putting it all back together. So we finished up the wiring in the last video, but I haven't loomed it up or put any of it away yet because I want to double check before I tape that all up and tuck it back away. I want to test it. So we got to get the transmission in and the battery in and a few other things done first. The order in which I'm going to proceed now with that the wiring is done is I'm going to knock that punch out in the firewall and install that clutch pedal. It's easier to do the wiring first before you do the clutch pedal. It just gives you a little more room for your elbows while you're working up under the dash. And then before the transmission's in, we'll do the work in the engine bay of hooking up those lines to the clutch. We need the feed line that comes down from the master cylinder on the brake, and then the supply line that comes off the bottom of the pedal and comes over to the top of the transmission. So we're gonna go ahead and get those routed. Then we'll go ahead and get that transmission in. Well, one exception, that if you haven't already done the cooler bypass, it's actually a heat exchanger, but most people call it a cooler that goes on the auto transmissions, and it circulates heat between your coolant and the transmission fluid. Well, the automatics have it, the manuals don't. So basically you just take those two hoses off of the automatic transmission, put a coupler in there, right size for the coolant lines, and clamp them together. Then we'll get the transmission hung, put the dog bone mount, the main transmission mount on the side here. Then we can install the axles. We can mount all the electronics that go to it. The starter will go back on. We'll get the axles on, get the suspension back together. And then we'll get that shift box mounted back in the tunnel, put the heat shield back in, and then we can put that exhaust back together. And then we can go back inside the car and put together the top of the shift box there. Then once the shift box is in, then we have the cables in, so we can route our cables, the shift cables, and get those adjusted. Very important to adjust those cables before you try to shift that transmission so that it indexes to the correct gear. And while you're there, you might as well go ahead and bleed the transmission, the clutch. Don't forget to bleed the clutch. Plenty of times people think that they installed a bad clutch or something went wrong, and all it is really is an air bubble, just like in your brakes. You have a little tiny air bubble in there, and it really degrades the performance of your clutch, same as in the brakes. So make sure you bleed that together. By the way, I have made this mistake before, so learn from my mistakes. I have gone to test the car, and it would not start, and I could not figure out what it was. I forgot the very last step of the electrical is to take that number 53 relay and plug it back into that socket that we did all that wiring on. I get so excited and I go to test it and I forgot to put that relay in. It's a really simple little thing, but if you forget it, obviously nothing's gonna work right. So don't forget to get that relay in. And then again, you can button up all underneath the dash and that knee panel underneath there, get that all in. Get your air box back in, your battery tray or whatever air filter system you have, get your battery tray back in and put the battery in permanent. Then it's time to take it for a test ride. If you did take the suspension apart to get those axles out, you may need to go get an alignment depending on what you did with the ball joints, depending on how you got those axles out. So don't forget, you may need that alignment. And then the best part of it all is drive around and enjoy your new manual transmission in your automatic car. So let's get into a few of these things that we're gonna get knocked out today and see if we can get this thing wrapped up. So here's prepping to put the pedal in. Really tough to film, so bear with me. But here we're looking at the automatic brake pedal. And behind it, you'll see, this is the steering column cover. You take these two guys off, unscrewed that from right here, and then that will pop out so that we can get access to here. If you fold this carpet back, you'll see it's already cut. and it's just barely hanging on. So if you pry that out, and that piece just pulls out, it's a little bit keyhole shaped. Okay, that's just the carpet underlayment. Now you'll see a keyhole shaped grommet. Oh man. Sometimes it's actually metal and sometimes it's just a rubber grommet. That's just a rubber grommet. So you pop that grommet out, and that's where the brake pedal the clutch pedal master cylinder fits through. And those two studs, let me see if I can get a pointer in there. These two studs, that one and that one, is two of the three that the clutch pedal mounts on. There's a third one up top. I think you can see it up there. So those three studs, you slide the clutch pedal, after you take that grommet out, slide the clutch pedal onto those three studs and put your 13mm nuts on there, and your clutch pedal is installed. There is no way I can film doing that, so you're gonna have to just take my word for it. Then don't forget to put the cross brace that goes from the top of the clutch pedal over to the top of the brake pedal, and put your switches on. And that's really all there is to putting the clutch pedal in. It's fairly simple, it's just that it's tough access to get to. So here's a manual brake pedal, and you can see it's the normal profile that we're used to. All right, so compare that to what's in the car here. That is an automatic brake pedal. And all it is this plate is spot welded, and then there's a bead run down this side. So it's kind of a debate, and I'll have to zip tie those wires up out of the way, whether it's easier to drill and cut to take that plate off, because if you take an angle grinder and slice back here and then drill out these spot welds, that plate will pop off, and then you don't have to mess with the pedal. It's kind of a pain, but it's also kind of a pain to swap the pedal. So 6 of one, half dozen the other. I'm gonna go ahead and drill this and cut the spot welds, and then we'll show you what it looks like. So there's the pedal. I got that welded on plate off, and you can see I need to do just a little bit of cleaning up of that weld so the pedal pad will fit back on it. I started by cutting the extension off. Actually, it was on like that. I cut that extension off the side, and you could do that, just cut that off, but you'll never get a pedal pad, a factory style pedal pad to fit back on the pedal. So once you got that cut off, then you can get to this weld that's on the left-hand side, or the driver's side of the car. It runs down along that edge of the pedal. So I drilled out those spot welds and then grabbed it with a pliers and, you know, just a big channel lock, and just started prying up, and it pops loose. So now I just clean it up, and then I'm done, and a fancy pedal pad, like a GTI style pedal pad, will fit on there, or a stock rubber one, whatever you want to do. All right, so we got the pedal in. Here we are looking down towards the firewall from the front of the car. And you can see I have attached the feed line, if I can get it to focus in the right place, to the top nipple that sticks through the firewall from the clutch pedal. So this hose here goes to the master cylinder. So on your master cylinder, you cut this nipple off right in that little indentation there. Be ready for brake fluid to come pouring out, but you quick pop that hose on and then run the clamp up, and that supplies brake fluid from the brake master cylinder to the clutch master cylinder, which is the one in the pedal. Then once we have that done, we got to put the supply line on that nipple that's underneath the hose that I just put on. And that supply line goes from the pedal, which is the clutch master cylinder, over to the slave cylinder, which is in the top of the transmission. That one you got to access from underneath the car. And if you look, it's hard to see, it's very hard to film here, but that nipple is actually pointing downwards. So from underneath the car, you can push it up, and that will be this end, right, this is just a fancy pivot, this angle, 45-degree angle on the clutch line, right? And that just presses up in and will lock in to the nipple we were just looking at. On the other end is a T, and that presses in once we get the transmission in. That presses into the transmission, and then this is our bleed screw to bleed it. Okay, here's looking up from the ground underneath the car. The silver and black there is the brake booster, and that's the ABS pump to the right. And if you look between them, you can see there's the hose with the angle adapter attached into the pedal. It's kind of hard to get a view there of the actual connection. You can just kind of see it, but the camera won't focus. And that kind of olive color line coming down right in front of us there underneath the ABS pump, that's the new hydraulic line that's going to go to the slave cylinder on the transmission. So we got that installed. Now we want to do this hydraulic line. If you're going to do the power steering line, change the power steering line, you want to do that before you put the transmission in. Transmission back in is the transmission cooler bypass. So this hose, which comes from the T there right at the end of the head, right? That T comes out, and that normally goes straight to the top of the transmission, and this hose comes from behind the transmission and goes to the other port on it. So all you do is get you a fitting that fits both those, trim those hoses back a little bit, and then put that fitting in. And now you have the coolant bypass, so you're not going into the transmission cooler, which no longer exists. So here we are under the car, and here's the new shift box, right? I wound it in between the two pieces of exhaust, right? And the cables run forward up into the engine bay. You got your two 13mm bolts in the back, and then there's two nuts on the top you got to get from inside the car. Now I'm ready to slide that heat shield back up over the exhaust and make sure that those cables are on top of the heat shield. Then you can put that exhaust back together. All right, so I'm almost ready to hoist this transmission up in there. Before you get the transmission up under the car, you want to put a little bit of lubricant on the splines here, right? Because the clutch plate has to slide back and forth here, and just a tiny bit on the front of the throwout bearing. You don't want so much that it's going to sling off and get onto the clutch plate. What I've been using is the Sil Glide stuff, non-melting, non-freezing, waterproof, etc., etc. But you can use just about anything, but get good coverage on those splines, but no globs of it that will sling off and get into your clutch plate. So we're talking about just a light coat, just a little smooth coating on it. Then we're ready to hoist this sucker up in there. One tip I forgot to mention, if you're doing a 6-speed, that 6-speed transmission is a little bit bigger than the 5-speed, but it's smaller and lighter than the automatic. Getting that up into the cavity can be challenging. The transaxle actually fits above the lower subframe. So to hoist that back in, it's best to rotate the transmission so that the transaxle is pointing up, lift it up, and as you clear that transaxle, let that transmission go back to level. So you may have to use an extra strap on your hoist if you're using an engine hoist, which I like to do. I put a cargo strap from the back of the transmission, right, and ratchet that up. So when I first put it on the hoist, the transmission sits level. And then I put that extra strap on the back, winch that up, hoist it up into position, and then as it comes up past that subframe, I start letting that cargo strap out so the transmission levels back out by the two chains I have it hanging from. That makes it a lot easier to get in. You may have noticed that with the automatic. The automatic really needs to come out the same way. You have to pull it over towards the driver's side and then twist it up and then drop it on out of the car. And you got to do the reverse, especially with the 6-speed. The 5-speed isn't as much. You can almost just bring that 5-speed straight up in and on. But the 6-speed definitely has to come up and tilt back. Because you can spend quite a bit of time fighting getting that transmission in there. It's tight, but it will fit. Okay, here's an interference I haven't run into before, but I think it's because I've never done a 6-speed on the 1.8. So the shift cable bracket, which you can see sitting here, won't go into position. That grommet should have a bolt go through there because it's hitting this AC or coolant. I'm sorry, this coolant line comes down and goes into a hard line right there. And that bracket should fit onto that bolt there. All right, so I'm gonna have to reroute that hard line there. So I'm gonna try cutting that bracket right there so I can pull this out a little bit, but more than likely, I'm gonna end up taking this line off right here and just coming straight out. This line goes to the heater core up underneath the rain tray there. So I can run a soft line from here and just run it up and through everything. So that's probably gonna be the solution. But like I said, every time you do one of these, every time it's a little bit different motor, a little bit different transmission, you're gonna run into little different things. So you just gotta be prepared to figure it out and just, you kind of wiggle on stuff and think about other ways to route things. Anyway, this is specific to the 2004 1.8 going with a O2M with a 6-speed transmission on it. So if you put a 5-speed in, the bracket mounts out further here, so you won't run into that issue with putting a 5-speed in. And I don't have that coolant line on my TDIs, and I don't remember running into that on any of the VR6s I've done. So each one is a little bit different. You just got to start playing with it. Okay, here we are again looking on the top of the transmission, and that water line that I was talking about here that was impeding on this cable. Yeah, my hand makes a shadow there. On this cable here, I found another way to route it. So it comes straight across now and goes up. So we got the cables on. Well, before I go into that, let me show you what I did. So this is the U that was on there, right? And the right-hand end here goes up into the heater core here. And then this elbow on this end came off that one right there. So you probably won't run into this unless you happen to be doing the exact same thing here. A 1.8T and an O2M transmission. So for those of you that are thinking about it for that car and that transmission, there was 2 little brackets. So you can see I cut one there and I cut one there. It was a little bit tricky. It'd be easier to do while the transmission's out, but I didn't know there was going to be interference until I got the transmission in. And then I ran a piece of heater hose from that elbow straight back, and then it winds up right here and joins. So I had to go through my bin of old parts from parting cars out. So you might not have that laying around, but you could do it with straight heater hose, and you might have to use a 90 joint. Anyway, just working it out. So I have now that I got that worked out, I've got the cables on and I have them adjusted. Don't forget to adjust your cables so that you line up with the proper gears. And then I've bled the clutch. So this is the manual power steering line. You can see it routes a little bit different. The automatic routes on the back side of this, kind of almost in the fender well. So it's a little bit easier having the manual. So I went ahead and put that on and got that hydraulic hose that comes from the master in the brake pedal, in the clutch pedal, and it comes to the slave here, and then this is your bleed valve. Got the starter cables all hooked up. So here is the power coming from your positive terminal on the battery to the starter, and then the relay, the starter relay wire clipped in. The ground that was on the front of the transmission on the manuals goes to that stud on the top bolt of the transmission, right there. So the engine is now properly grounded, and we have all of our electrical cables routed correctly. The VSS, right, the speed sensor, that routes back to the back of the transmission. I doubt I can get a shot of it here, but it's back behind those cables there. It's plugged in. And the reverse switch on the transmission there is hooked up right there below the shift tower on the front of the transmission, underneath the clutch line there. So we're all hooked up in the engine bay. It's not all put back together. As you can see, the rain tray is still open. So I'm gonna wait until I test it to wrap that all back up, but I'm gonna plug the ECU back in here, just set the battery in and hook it up, and we'll test some of those circuits and make sure that, that we're working right before we button all that up. So we're back from the test drive. Ran great. Cruise control works, backup lights work. Of course, the starter relay is working right. VSS is working right. So all of those circuits that we were messing with, readjusting, seem to be correct and are working correctly. Ran the codes one last time after I got back. No codes are popping. So I think we've got it. She's in good shape. So now that I'm back from the test drive, I'm gonna loom the wiring harness to the ECU, put the wiper motor and rain tray and wipers back in, check the wheel lug torque one more time, and she's good. So hopefully this video will help you make the decision if you should do a transmission swap. Hopefully it'll give you some guide as to how to do it. Disclaimer, you're responsible for the work that you do your car, especially as you cut into the wiring harness. Double check before you cut any wires. This was my technique of how I go about it. There are probably plenty of other ways to do it. So don't be surprised if you come across another way. And as always, if you have questions, comments, or you do know a better way to do some part of this, or you have a better suggestion, put it in the comments so the next guy that watches the video can pick up that information and we all just get better and better. Thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe. I need that support so I can keep making these videos and bringing you this content. If you're interested in some swag, t-shirts, hats, whatever, you can go to HespermanMotorworks.com and you can browse for some swag there. Y'all have a good day. Thanks.